What do you think when you see a giant monster, such as Godzilla or King Kong, stomping across the movie screen? What are your thoughts when you see something so out of this world? Many things might go through your mind. What will happen next? What is Godzilla about to do? This looks super cool. These are genuine thoughts that probably go through your head. But something I guarantee that you don't think about is how the shot was made, what's really real and what isn't. Hi, my name is Sam Florin, and welcome to my Masterworks presentation, a study into what computer-generated imagery is, how it's used in real life, and my journey within creating my own computer-generated animation. To start off this wild roller coaster, we must ask ourselves the golden question. Why did I choose this topic out of many possibilities? Well, I am very indecisive when it comes to my passions. I either love it and pursue it extensively, or I try it and give it up after a few days. As you can probably guess, this passion was one that I pursued greatly. And when it came to choosing my Masterworks, I thought about how great of an opportunity this would be to increase my skills and knowledge. That is why I chose to research this process in media, and make my own computer-generated animation. This gave me insight into all the steps and processes involved in what happens in the real-world industry. So what is computer-generated imagery? Computer-generated imagery, also known as CGI, is the application of online digital computer graphics and comes in many forms. It can be found in most modern films or as a still piece of artwork, either dynamic or static. There are many different parts and sections of CGI, which I will explain very soon, so make sure to keep listening to find out. Now, as what I said may seem pretty confusing, I'll put it simply. Computer-generated imagery is where you create something that would be too difficult or too expensive to film and create it digitally. To help explain, let's take my example from before. It would be impossible to have a giant dinosaur, such as Godzilla, and a giant gorilla, such as King Kong, on screen in real life and fight for the entire movie. Yes, there are certain ways you could pull this off, such as puppets and stop motion, but for the most efficient and realistic results, you would create it digitally. So when you first hear the words computer-generated imagery, it's possible that you don't understand the full depth of how it works. There are many different parts to it that I can't even begin to wrap my head around. But not to worry, I assure you that after a year of research, I do know a little bit about my Masterworks topic. There are several main essentials required to make a realistic CGI scene. The main ones I'll be covering today is 3D modeling, texturing, lighting, animation, rendering, and compositing. In 3D computer graphics, 3D modeling is the process of creating the elements of the scene. There are a couple different ways of creating 3D models. The first is to model it manually by moving, sculpting, and extruding vertices. Another method is to scan a living object and process it into a 3D asset. This is called photogrammetry. Once the model is complete, you can continue to add more detail with texture mapping. The final model is called an asset, used to assist in the development and finalization of your scene. 3D texturing is probably the most complex aspect of CGI. Essentially, you create high-resolution, realistic texture maps that can be applied to a 3D object or environment. Texture mapping originally referred to diffuse mapping, a method that simply pastes pixels from a texture to a 3D surface. In recent years, as CGI texturing becomes more advanced and realistic, new methods of texturing have made it possible to simulate near photorealism in real time by vastly reducing the number of polygons and lighting calculations needed to construct a realistic and functional 3D scene. All right, now you've made a scene, you've modeled a good asset and textured it how you want it. Now it's time to turn this into a proper scene and model and light it correctly. Lighting is one of the most complex parts of the scene. Lighting is everything. Without it, your scene will look bland and boring. Even if you have an extremely detailed 3D model, it can look flat and unconvincing without the correct lighting. There are 6 main types of lights found in 3D softwares, each of them having slightly different qualities and creating slightly different results. The first type of lighting is one that is commonly used and easy to understand. It is called a point light. Point lights are an infinitely small area in space that casts light from every direction to illuminate the scene. They are extremely useful for creating light bulbs, Christmas lights, candles, etc. Different from other methods of lighting, more specifically point lighting, which occupies a specific location in the 3D scene. A directional light is meant to represent an extremely distant light source, like the sun or the moon. Rays cast from directional lights run parallel in a single direction from every point in the sky and are typically used to simulate direct sunlight. So unlike other types of lighting, spotlights used in 3D applications are very similar to their real-world counterparts. The point of a spotlight is to emit a cone-shaped ray of light. Spotlights are often used for three-point studio lighting, and also for making any light fixture where there is a distinct visual change from light to dark. Street lights, desk lamps, overhead cone lighting, strobe lights, etc. An area light casts light from within a set boundary. Area lights have a specific rectangular or circular shape and size, making them very useful for simulating fluorescent light fixtures, backlit panels, and other similar lighting features. Area lights are often used in product lighting and architectural lighting due to its wide illumination. Volumetric lights are probably the most complicated types of light to understand. With default settings, it's almost exactly the same as the point light, emitting omnidirectional rays from a central point. However, unlike a point light, a volumetric light has a specific shape and size, both of which affect its fall-off pattern. A volumetric light can be set in the shape of any geometric primitive, a cube, sphere, cylinder, etc. It won't illuminate the outer surface, but only the surface within the volume. An ambient light projects soft light rays in every direction and can be used to raise the overall level of diffuse illumination in the scene. It doesn't have any specific direction when pointed, and therefore casts no ground shadow. However, it is not truly omnidirectional like a point light. Ambient light is relatively similar to the light experienced at dusk, just after the sun has set. Phew. So that was a lot of information to absorb at once. It takes a while to understand it all. Now, before I move on, let's take a deep breath in. All right, that's enough now. Let's move back to the fun stuff. Computer animation is the method of creating digitally moving images. Computer animation sits under the term computer-generated imagery, CGI, which is a more general term that includes both static and dynamic images. Computer animation is its own different process of generating images entirely. In the past, before computer animation existed, there would be a different process used called stop motion. But as the technology progressed and became more accessible, most artists switched to creating animation digitally. The term 3D rendering is the process of creating 2D images in a 3D computer software. 3D rendering is the final step to creating your 3D scene. There are two different types of 3D rendering you can do, photoreal and non-photoreal. A photoreal environment would be an architectural interior that looks like a real-life photograph. On the other hand, a non-photoreal image could be a cartoon style. 3D rendering is essential for many different industries, including architecture, video game design, advertising, product design, and the visual effects and CGI for film and TV. When it comes to the visual effects industry, rendering is fundamental to the creation and sequence of the final product. Whether it's an action sequence, an explosion, exotic environments, etc., it all requires rendering. For example, with this photo, you can see that what it would look like in the software without any textures. And on top, it shows after the final render with the details and correct lighting. During the post-production stage in the creation of your animation or final render, there is almost always compositing involved to polish off the final result. Some visual effects, such as sparks, dust, raindrops, camera shakes, etc., is more easily achieved in a 2D environment at the end of the project without sacrificing the quality. As you can see in the image there, they've replaced the background mountains, changed the coloring, and pretty much the entire background. So obviously there are a lot of steps that go into creating a CGI shot or image. But with all those stages, there can come extreme confusion and not knowing what to do or when to do it. That is why the 3D pipeline exists. The 3D pipeline is the method and order of how renders are made in the industry and in any computer-generated design. It is a system used to maximize efficiency and make sure everything is predetermined so that everyone working knows when and how to get their work done. It ensures that the job is done on time and efficiently passed on to the next to be continuously worked on. Highly complex work, like professional 3D animation, often requires large teams of artists and creatives working on a tight schedule. So an efficient system is essential for the final product to be completed at the correct time and at the highest quality. While different production companies have their own ways of accomplishing their tasks and meet the needs of different types of productions vary, they all follow the basic idea and principle of the 3D pipeline. So now that we understand all the key elements of CGI, it's time to explore how this is used in the film industry. The list of different specific jobs required to finish a shot in the industry is extensive, each of them related to the different steps required that were stated above in the 3D pipeline. Each job is extremely important to finishing the task ahead. For example, without a concept artist, the modeling artists and texture artists wouldn't know what the environment is supposed to look like, and therefore wouldn't know where to begin. So after doing this research, I was ready to then create my own computer-generated animation. At first, I wasn't sure what the story should be. My first two ideas were to either make a small robot animation or a space scene. But then one day, as I was watching a car commercial, it struck me how cool it would be to create some form of car commercial animation. So that is what I chose to create, and what I've been working on all year. Now that I had this idea, it was time to put it into action. The first steps were to plan out what was going to happen in the animation. I started by writing out a script. I wrote out the actions and movements both for the car and the camera. After writing and editing the script, I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted everything to look and behave like. But before I moved on to creating the final product, I needed to get a visual sense of how everything looked in terms of animation and camera movement. To get this visual idea of how it would look, I created a 3D storyboard. I was using a 3D software called Blender, mainly because it's free, but also because I had some prior knowledge in the program. To start off, I made an extremely basic scene, with some basic mountains in the background and the main car consisting of a box for the body and 4 primitive circles as the wheels. I then animated the scene using keyframes, which is a point that defines the start and end of the movement. I positioned the camera to follow the car and ended up with my 7 original shots. This type of storyboard is called a proxy, a technique used to get an idea of how the scene should look, but with very limited detail. The storyboard does not have any audio, as it was used solely for the purpose of giving me a visual sense of how the scene should look. Here's the final storyboard. Now that I had finished the planning stage of the process, it was time to start building assets. In other words, start modeling the car. All right, I have something to confess. Before this project, I had had very little modeling experience. But I thought that if I watched some videos and tutorials on how to 3D model, I'd have no problem putting this car together. You all have no idea how wrong I was. It turns out modeling cars in particular is an extremely difficult and tedious process, and there were many different attempts with interesting results, such as this one, and this one, and this one. All of them with varying levels of realism. Well, not really. I doubt you'd be walking around downtown and see a car that looks like this. No, I wasn't satisfied with my previous attempts at modeling a car, so I took a step back and assessed what needed to be done differently. After much thought, I decided the solution was to take a different approach to the method of modeling. Before, I had modeled the whole car together as one great mesh, with no creases or minor details. The other possible approach was much harder and delicate, and would take a lot longer, but with a much more realistic result. It was to model the different parts of the car separately, such as the trunk as one mesh, the roof as another, the doors, etc. But even with this new method of modeling, I still had trouble making it look good, and there were several different attempts with different types of cars. At first, I attempted to model a Lamborghini, but after about 10 minutes of trying to model it, I realized I was biting off way more than I could chew in terms of my modeling skills. As you can see on the image of the real Lamborghini, there are a lot of tiny details, something I would have found extremely difficult to model. So I then looked for a simpler type of car, an older car. I settled on a Chevrolet Impala, which was actually going pretty well for the first half. I'd modeled the roof and trunk, and I had modeled the hood and the roof, and was moving on to the trunk, when things started to get difficult. I realized I had made some modeling mistakes beforehand, such as not paying attention to how many vertices were on each face. Having the wrong amount of vertices made it extremely difficult to extrude and insert faces to make smaller details. So I decided to scrap this attempt and try again. I was struggling. I was finding it extremely difficult to model something correctly and realistically. I'd been choosing cars to model that were way too difficult for my standards. So I went out searching for a vehicle that had a simple shape and not too many tiny details. In the end, after much searching, I found the correct car, the Volkswagen Polo. And not to worry, this car I actually stuck with. Thanks to the easier design, in my previous month of car modeling experience, it was much easier to model this car. After a few weeks of modeling this new car with the same technique used for the last one, I finally finished it. Immediately after completing the model, I moved on to texturing. First, I created the shiny red paint coat, adding some smudges and scratches to make it look a bit more worn and used. I then created the window texture and the wheel textures and other smaller detailed textures to assist the overall look. And just like that, my final model was complete. It took many weeks and many attempts to get to the point I was. And even then, the model wasn't completely perfect. There were still some small mistakes in the mesh. For instance, the trunk wasn't completely finished and still looked slightly unrealistic and lumpy. Fortunately, in the actual animation, it would be hard to notice these small details due to the movement of the car. I was also running out of time and needed to move on to creating the environment and animating the actual shots. Believe it or not, modeling the car was actually the hardest part of this entire project. While creating the environment still came with its challenges, I felt I had a general idea of how I wanted it to look. My plan was to create the environment, but always add more detail, or change it ever so slightly while I was making it. That way, it would always evolve closer to the realistic result I wanted it to reach. After creating the project file for the environment, my first steps were to create the ground and build up from there. I added something called a procedural landscape, meaning a generated piece of bumpy and uneven mesh that could be edited and changed if needed. So after I tweaked the settings to how I saw them fit, I added a hair particle system to the surface, mimicking the appearance of grass. I then copied and pasted them into 2 rows and added a long, flat square of mesh, also known as a plane, to be the road. After completing those first steps, I was ready to begin adding detail, textures, and lighting. To the grass, I added a greenish-brown texture and displaced it even more so that it would be even crazier, just like normal grass. I then found a rocky road texture and added it to the plane. At this point, my computer was getting pretty slow while working on the environment. It's difficult for a MacBook to handle many different hair particle systems, as well as many different displaced meshes. So what was I going to do about the background mountains and trees? It would be extremely hard on my computer to model them individually. So in my next Masterworks meeting, I brought up the problem, and like the geniuses they are, my advisors suggested simply importing 2D images of trees and mountains with transparent backgrounds. This worked amazingly for my purposes, and immediately solved the problem. At this point, the environment was done. However, I would continue to tweak it a little bit as the project progressed, such as moving a tree over ever so slightly or changing the amount of grass. Now, with the environment essentially being done, it was time to bring the car in the car and start setting up each shot and animating them. Compared to modeling the car and constructing the environment, setting up the camera movements and animating went much quicker. This was because I had already made my 3D storyboard, so all I needed to do was look back at it for reference and make it better. Animating was certainly the easiest part of creating my animation. I would have the car follow a path and keyframe it along the road. I then positioned the camera to the shot specifications, and if it needed to be animated, I would keyframe it to follow the car. Once I finished the shots, I was ready to hit the render button. But first, I needed to change some settings. I turned on motion blur and made some slight color adjustments to make it darker. I turned on some settings that would overall increase the quality of the final shot. Rendering each shot took a long time, and I mean a really long time. The longest shot took a week. But fortunately, once each shot was finished, I was happy with them and didn't need to redo them. The tricky part was done. Now all that was left to do was a small amount of compositing on the shots, edit them together, and add some sound and music. I was easily able to complete these tasks. I did some color correction to some of the shots, edited them together, and went online and found some royalty-free music and sound effects. And after all this time, it was finally done. And without further ado, let's watch my final short animation. At the beginning of this project, I knew about a fraction of what I know about computer-generated imagery now. My knowledge was just beginning to expand on how to use and navigate my 3D software Blender. But I knew very little about the terminology, techniques, and what they meant and included. I didn't quite understand what complex modeling looked like and the best way to compose the scene to achieve the most realism. And now, 7 months later, while I have become more knowledgeable and familiar with how certain parts of CGI work and how it's used in the industry, I still have so much more to learn. If there's one extremely important thing I've learned throughout this entire project, is that when it comes to CGI, you never stop learning. You don't just take one lesson and understand it all in 1 or 2 years. You always experiment and try new methods and things you may not have known you could have done. When I first started this journey, I was ready to rush into the project and start planning and creating a whole completely CGI short film. I soon came to understand that creating a product that mimics realism takes months, possibly years. Each step takes extreme precision, detail, and patience. When I started the first modeling process in my animation, I rushed into it and tried to get it done as quickly as possible. As a result of this, I had modeled it incorrectly and it ended up looking unrealistic. If patience is not practiced, then you will end up with a very low-quality product. Now that I have a much better insight into all the different parts of CGI and how essential they are, and have much more experience, I intend to continue practicing and developing my skills and bring them to a whole new level. I've learned so much throughout this entire project. When I chose this topic, there were certain aspects of CGI I couldn't wrap my head around, but that I now completely understand. If you truly devote yourself to a project or hobby and practice at it and discover more about it, the better you will become, and the more interesting the subject becomes. Before I finish today, there are definitely some things in order. First, I would like to thank my parents. Even though you knew pretty much nothing about my topic, you were still able to give me invaluable advice on writing my paper, and in the end, reading and editing it. You guys would check in with me all the time and make sure I was on track and not procrastinating. You guys were awesome, and thank you so much. Next, I need to thank my sister, Sid. Partly because she asked to be mentioned in my thanks, but also because she was very helpful when it came to doing the dishes while I was up in my room working hard at Masterworks. She would also bake cookies, it felt like 5 times a week, and was always willing to share, so thank you very much. I would like to thank one of my advisors, Pete McGowan. Your advice while I was creating my animation was beyond helpful. It probably saved it from becoming a huge mess. I'm always in awe about how much about the subject you seem to know, and I thank you so much for sharing with me. Towson River. Without your help and advice on modeling the car, I'm pretty sure it would have ended up looking a lot like this. Honestly, I have no idea what I would have done without you. Your knowledge in Blender is incredible, and the way you were able to explain that knowledge to me and make it understandable was truly amazing. Thank you so much. My internal advisor, Julie Langlois. Words cannot fully express how helpful and supportive you were throughout this entire year. You were always there and available if I needed to quickly meet with you or ask you something about my project. And your advice on how I should write my paper saved me many hours of struggling how to start. Not to mention that you read through the entire 40 pages in 3 days, leaving suggestions and making edits. Thank you so much, and I couldn't have done it without you. I would like to thank Jen Hendrickson for coordinating the entire Masterworks program. I honestly have no idea how you're able to keep 12, 14 to 15-year-olds staying on track and not start procrastinating. It's truly amazing what you're able to pull off each year of Masterworks. And finally, I would like to thank all of you for coming and listening to my Masterworks. Thank you.
Excellent work, Mr. Florin. We are now going to turn it over to the floor for some questions, starting with the advisors. So, Julie, can you start? Can you stand up and speak loudly?
So Sam, wonderful presentation. That's so well done and professional. I've seen your journey all throughout the year. I've seen your attempts, I've seen your struggles. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what your biggest challenge was in this animation?
Well, definitely the biggest challenge was modeling the car. I had no idea how to model. I had pretty much never modeled anything before. And at the start, I was trying to model something that was really complicated. And it was very hard to model something very complex like that. So, and even the one that I chose still was pretty difficult to model. But I felt that with my previous attempts, I definitely learned a lot. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome, Mark. I'm really impressed by what you did. And as you said just now, yes, the car is like the hardest thing I've ever modeled personally. So when you chose it, I thought, well, that's going to be a huge challenge, but I think you can do it, and you did. So awesome work.
Thank you.
And I kind of have a couple of questions that are related. The first one is there a part of this that you most enjoyed that you think you want to focus on more in the future? Like modeling or texturing?
Yeah, I really liked it all. I feel I definitely want to keep working at learning how to model. That was something that, as much as it was very difficult, it was actually a lot of fun.
Really
And the final product is like really rewarding once you finish it. So, yeah.
I'm also wondering, do you have any plans for future projects?
No, not right now. I haven't thought about it.
Amazing job.
Thank you.
Questions from the floor, starting with Sydney. Sydney, can you move up to the front because the mic's here on this camera? Thanks.
Well done, Mr. Florin. My question is, what type of jobs are used in the industry?
Yeah, so as I said, there are a lot, and I only looked into a few specific ones. Each one is related to a different step required in the 3D pipeline. For instance, there's modeling artists, texture artists, animators, render artists, and then there's like generalists who are essentially good at everything and work at everything. But those are the main ones I looked into.
And what was your favorite step of making your animation?
Probably the environment. I really like that, and I like the result. So.
Thank you.
Mr. Florin, that was amazing.
Thank you.
I've seen you plugging away on that for the whole year. I'm glad it actually managed to work out. So I was going, oh my gosh, that's a lot. Mr. Florin, in your conclusion, you were talking about all kinds of amazing things, and I kept thinking, wow, this is really good advice. What is the biggest lesson you could take out of your project here and apply to life in general? What's the best life advice you learned from 3D modeling a car commercial?
take your time. Don't try to get it done as fast as possible because it won't work. But if you take your time and just take your time to enjoy the process, then it'll be pretty good.
That is excellent advice. Thank you. Thank you.
Man, car modeling, I know how that feels. But is there any way that you would improve your animation?
Yeah, for sure. So now that I know, mainly I would improve in terms of modeling because now that I know a lot more about it, I feel I could definitely improve on how many details I add and the overall shape of a car or any other type of model. So that's the main part I would improve.
Great presentation and amazing animation.
Thank you.
Mr. Florin. One question is, when I see in the behind of the scenes for a lot of movies, I see the people they want to animate, they have hats, and they also have green dots all over the face. What are those for?
That's called, oh my god, I forgot. Motion capture, yes. Where essentially you have a special suit where you can track the animations and movements of the person, and you can process it to a 3D model while still making adjustments to it because it won't be very smooth, but it's a lot easier way of doing character animations without starting from scratch.
Great job on the presentation, Mr. Florin.
Thank you.
In your mind, what would be the biggest drawback of computer-generated imagery?
What do you mean?
The biggest drawback, the thing that's the most challenging about it,
Oh.
maybe the least.
Well, each of them have all very specific different challenges, and it depends how you approach them, I guess. For instance, if you're animating a character, that's a lot, it's different than modeling a spaceship or something falling down. There's different techniques to that. Yeah, also, I'd say sometimes if you're working on something very complex, your hardware will get slow. That happened to me, and that can definitely impede the speed of of your progress. And yeah, that's what I would say.
Great job, Mr. Florin. My question is when dealing with all these immense issues that you face, how did you manage to stay motivated as an artist?
Good question. Well, kind of just thinking about the final product and kind of what I could make, I guess. Because I was always thinking of these new ideas and looking up inspiration. And I thought, if I can make something that looks like this, it'll definitely be worth it. So, yeah.
That was amazing. My question is, you talked about all these different kinds of lighting. What types of lighting do you use for the final animation?
Yeah, well, I actually used not one of the types of lights I talked about. So in my program, there's this add-on. It's called the Dynamic Sky add-on, and essentially it creates a realistic sky around the environment, and it simulates sky lighting as well. So, and I felt that while it was outside, that achieved the most realistic result for me, and it looked good. So yeah.
What's up, Mr. F? Great presentation, right? So I was just wondering, in Academy, side projects, maybe a YouTube channel or something, with a couple friends maybe, that you would like to promote in front of a lot of people.
Good work, Mr. Florin. Got a comment or a question?
You have like YouTube channels.
Oh,
Channel with Cole?
oh yeah, like Cole and some other people and I make like short films and stuff. So.
Would you like to give it a plug?
It's called Into the Horizon Productions.
Into the Horizon Productions!
Okay, moving on to the next question. Sam, please.
Very good work, Mr. Florin. This is sort of like a dumb question, but what's your favorite animation movie?
That's a great one.
That's a
great.
I have no idea. Yeah, I don't know. I don't watch too many ones that are completely animated. But yeah.
I have one more question. So a few years ago, you really loved to do stop motion animations, and I remember you doing that like a lot, all the time. Why did you make that shift from stop motion to computer?
I felt I could do more with like computer stuff, and yeah.
Is there any film that inspired you to want to get into computer animation?
There's a lot. Because there's CGI in pretty much most modern films, and so seeing them and like all those cool different renders was super cool. It all inspired me.
Can I ask you a question, Mr. Florin?
Yes.
I'm wondering how much experience you had on Blender before you started this, and I don't know if you can say that in hours or.
A few months. So not too much, but I knew how to navigate and work around software.
Does anyone in the audience have experience on Blender? What? Yeah, it's interesting to see. I know a lot of kids have started projects in some classes, and it's really cool to see where you've taken something that you know a little bit about to be able to produce what you did in this presentation. So it's inspiring. You have a question?
Professor Florin, congratulations on your excellent presentation.
Thank you.
I'm in awe of your sense of self and your self-confidence. Early in your presentation, you actually made us laugh. And I was just wondering, did someone advise you to be cute at that moment, or is that
Be cute now.
I mean, no one told me to. I mean, I tried to like make my slides somewhat funny because it's a difficult topic to understand. So.
And your film that you presented to us, does it have a name?
No.
I have an idea for a name.
Oh, great.
Godzilla gets his driver's license.
Mr. Florin, thank you for that very, very interesting and inspiring presentation. I learned a lot listening to you. Sam, or Mr. Florin, I know you're a deep thinker, and I'm curious, as you went through this year-long process and came to know about computer-generated imagery, etc., if you found any commentary, because what I find as a member of society is there's so much fake stuff out there. I never know what's real. I go to a movie now, I don't know if it was real or not, and we hear that a lot in the news. And I wonder if through the process that you went through to create, is if you heard any commentary or witnessed any of those things, those ethical boundaries where people are making something look real maybe that isn't real, or is misinformation or disinformation. I'm curious if you had anything like that through the process.
Not really, because I'm creating this, like I created this for like entertainment film purposes, not exactly like trying to look like someone else or in that sense.
Is it right to say that that is the same, like people when they learn and understand software and ways to manipulate, is it safe to say that that's the same thing that some people do to not entertain but to, you know, push a point of view or to share something that, you know, is maybe political in nature?
Make hamburgers look really good from McDonald's.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, definitely with commercials that's used a lot. Yeah, I didn't go into that too much.
It's okay. I was curious if there was something that popped out through that process, but yeah, awesome presentation, Mr. Florin. Thank you.
It was really good, Sam. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, I'm interested in the whole process of Masterworks, and you know, I'm accompanying one particular person who's in grade 8 right now, imagining what he might do for his Masterworks project. And I imagine all the grade 8s could be in much the same place as they listen to you folks in grade 9 this year. How did you settle on this? I know you're a great violinist. Why didn't violin feature in this? Why did you choose that rather than 6 other things you could have chosen?
Because I felt that this one I didn't know very much about, and so whereas some of the other topics I could have chosen, I knew quite a bit about them, and I'd been working on them for like a while. So I felt this was a good opportunity to kind of increase my skill and knowledge.
And as you look back now, that was a good choice.
I'd say so, yeah.
Well done. Courageous.
Yeah. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.